the same.
The first hot lap was a 59.9. Second hot lap was a 58.9. Third hot lap was a 58.9.
Nice. All right, guys, welcome back to Flatirons Tuning. We are out at High Plains Raceway with the race car, as promised, and we've got with us Harvey, tuner extraordinaire, and our hot shoe for the day is Nigel, who you probably recognize from some of our videos. But ever since Nigel went off on his own, he's been doing a lot of racing, and so we decided to tap him to come out, drive the car, tell us what he thinks, and yeah. So what have we learned so far, guys? What do you think?
Dyno tuning works. It's doing great on the track even, so
yeah.
I like that a lot. Yeah, there's not much corrections I've had to do or any work. The data looks wonderful.
There was that weird limiting factor. What were we hitting?
It was a coolant pressure sensor limit. So we have a coolant pressure sensor in the cross pipe over the top of the engine, and it's seeing it has more to do with the RPM of the engine than it does with the actual temperature of the coolant.
Yeah.
We want to know, we sort of want to monitor it to prevent head gasket failure, but right now we're not getting to see what we want to see. We're seeing basically what the outlet of the pump is doing.
What normal is.
Yeah, what normal is.
Right.
We're learning that, and that might not be a good location for that sensor.
Yeah, and also another important thing to learn.
Yeah.
Nigel, how about the car? What did you think?
Car feels super tight. Everything we've done to it feels good so far. We're dialing in the suspension setup, obviously, and
yes.
Had a couple moments.
Well, and we knew that the brake bias, there was no brake bias now because the ABS was not working, and you discovered that really is something that needs attention.
Yeah, definitely.
So what happened?
We looped the car at 11, kept it all four on track, just a little lock up on the rear on entry, and then coming up to 13, top of the hill, same thing, looped the car.
Which is weird because my guess was going to be that the front was going to lock up, but the rear locked up.
Yep.
So
yeah,
playing with a little bit of suspension setups too, so maybe that will help. But more to the point, just trying to do some more hot laps, get some more data, see what's going on.
Exactly. Gotta get back out there.
Yeah. Cool.
It to 5,500 RPMs, max drive-by-wire is 50% for just this drive cycle. So even if you just turn it off and come back, it's gone. And one thing I'll say is I'd like to be able to have you guys not only see these, but be able to reset it from the CAN pad. So that if you're out here, you're not having to continue driving. You can see that it doesn't go away in the log, that check engine light. I'd like it to be where you can read it on the dash and then hit the CAN pad and it resets the computer and erases it.
Cooler.
Ah.
And so that's where the bubbles get popped and then and it's cooling off. Sure. So you're sending it through this matrix plus it's cooling, and that's where I think it's more homogeneous liquid coming out. And then, because the dry center tank, you're holding all of the oil outside of the engine and it radiates heat. It can drop heat also.
Yeah.
So, cooling it off before it gets to the tank, which can shed more heat, in theory, keeps the oil temps more in check.
Yeah.
And I mean, I don't
and
think,
more of an average too, with the sort of reserve in the tank.
I mean, I don't think the temps that we saw were bad by any stretch, especially with the good modern synthetic oil, 240 degrees.
Oh, yeah.
It's really not a big deal.
No.
But I mean, now seeing the correlation between the temperature and the pressure.
Yeah.
Now we have a good reason. Okay, it's worth putting in extra measures to try and keep the temps like 210, 220 instead of getting up to that 240, because then we're going to have even more better pressure.
Yeah.
Readings. And that should also keep the engine just running cooler in general. If we can keep the oil that much cooler, then it's going to have the liquid or the coolant.
Yeah, I once read that synthetics break down at 280 thermally, and then conventional at 250.
Yeah.
And that's a nice thing, but then I started looking into it and I read that it's happening all the time. It happens less in really cold climates than it does
Right.
in hot climates. Like, and it's a continuum, but definitely those temperatures are like where it really starts to kick off in a negative way that could affect you in like one drive cycle.
Yeah. I mean, 240 I think is okay, but it's not great.
Sure.
Like 220 would be way better.
Yeah.
260 would be way worse.
Oh yeah.
240, it's like that's like the high end of okay.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
I like it.
Yes. Gentlemen, we're at High Plains Raceway. It's the end of the day. I thought we should sit down in this very natural way, like not set up for camera at all, but just kind of talk through. There's a lot of takeaways from today. There's a lot that we learned. Just like, what are some of those high points? What do you think, Harvey?
I think as a tuner, a trackside tuner, it's really nice to go somewhere and just not be needed for much. You know, that's what you want to see.
That's
you
what
don't
you want.
want. Yeah, but I think it's also important to test and push things to the point where you run into some things, and we ran into some small things. But what's neat is the level of data acquisition connected to the tuning software, and the ability to mine the data for minutes and be like, I don't know what happened. And usually you'd be stuck trying to figure it out. Like, just bring it to my shop, we'll figure it out. So, you know, we'll hook it up on the dyno and we'll stand around and think about it. This ECU was able to just look at different data until we said, in fact, immediately it said, hey, this is the source of the cut, of the fuel cut. And it was like really obvious. And,
the other amazing thing with the data that the ECU gives is data in context.
Oh yeah.
So, we had a check engine light because of coolant pressure. Oh, okay. Show me all the other parameters that we're looking at when this coolant pressure condition happened. Is it something to be worried about or not? Look at it. Nope. Raise that limit.
Yeah.
We had a check engine light because of oil pressure. Look at all the other parameters that happened with the oil pressure. Didn't really know, but then we were able to focus what we were looking for and then figure out, okay, yes, this is to worry about, no, this isn't. What should we do to change it?
Sure.
Like the context that the data gives versus just like single points, like what you see with the gauge. Like that context of all the other gauge inputs is just such a game changer.
Oh yeah, yeah.
And just like the real-time information. Like Nigel's bringing the car into the hot pit, you're standing beside the car, you're immediately downloading the map onto your laptop, and you can see all this.
Yeah, and that's the other thing I'll say is the synergy, the ability for you to be checking tire pressures on the car while I'm wirelessly pulling the log from that lap and saying, hey, it's nothing to worry about, go back out in the time that you check the tire pressure. And then something else, the oil pressure, I mean, you're always going to want to pull in and be concerned about any oil pressure thing. And what's neat is I think we definitely are looking at a lot of data and saying, hey, is this normal data that we've never looked at before in this context? Because this ECU, we can say at this RPM and this oil temperature, this is what the oil pressure limit is. And so we were able to say, hey, you know, that looks okay. Let's fudge it just a little, because it was just barely hitting it on a 85 degree outside day with 240 plus degree oil temps. You're starting to see things that are like, hey, we're pushing it. And the computer not only cut, but usually you'd be like, as a tuner, you'd say, hey, what did I do wrong? Or what's wrong with the car's setup right now? And this time it was more like, oh wow, look, the oil pressure's dropping as the oil temperature goes up, and approach red line. Like,
You can see both of those things happening, and you see what the car is doing.
yeah,
And then you can tell Nigel, hey, next time you go out, let's try this different strategy for the hot laps to see if it makes a difference. And you know, you can see what difference, just how you're using the car and over what time and whatever it makes. I mean, it's just, you really have much better handle on what the car is doing, if you're having a problem, things to look for, all of that.
yeah.
Yeah, I mean, as a driver, it's amazing to just say, like, we have a run plan where you know what we're looking for, and let's go see if it changed.
Yeah.
Like,
Sure.
for me, just to get out there and do laps like that and have like that schedule in my head, it's so nice because, you know, beginning of the day, we don't have normals for anything.
Yeah.
We're not sure what sensors are going to be reading what highs and lows are. So going out first thing in the morning is a lot of unknowns. And so as a driver,
It's a fact-finding mission.
yeah, and with the sheer number of data points you can get off the ECU, as a driver, that's like, I have to do everything exactly right, but I don't know what right is yet. Like, I'm just driving the car to some limit, and that may or may not be the limit of what the data is saying yet.
Yeah.
Sure.
Nigel, what some key takeaways for you? What comes to top of mind?
The car is really well sorted. Like, it's really well built, put together. It feels really solid in the car. We had a suspension setting that was reversed at the beginning of the day. We flipped that just to dampen.
Well, and that's worth just a quick mention because so with your app, the Track Ninja, you're keeping track of lap times and settings. So you know what the settings were, you know what the behavior was. So like that, it's kind of data again. Like knowing where the car is sitting as you're going out. Hey, this doesn't feel right.
Yep.
You look back at the settings. I know that this is not feeling right. Let's flip these settings around. All of a sudden now the car feels way better. So it's like keeping track of where the suspension is set up, all that sort of stuff. It's almost as important as keeping track where the engine is set.
Yeah, exactly. And once we had figured out we had a 4,000 RPM rev limiter. Once we had figured that out, then I was able to push beyond that and find out that the suspension settings were flipped. Then once that was figured out, I could push the car even further, and that allowed us to see the temps come up and see everything that happens with that, because that wasn't just like, it wasn't just coolant temp or oil temp, it was kind of everything happening because the whole car was getting hot.
Right. But also the center diff was really interesting. So you were having inconsistent behavior, I guess, corner like apex and throttle on out of the corners?
Yeah.
So you had the wherewithal to realize, hey, this might have something to do with the center diff. So we also played around with the center diff settings and found another adjustment, get it back into one of the map DCCD pre-built maps, and then all of a sudden it became a lot more predictable.
Yeah, we dropped a full second after that, and I was pushing less. It was much more comfortable and more relaxed on a faster lap because of that change. Like that's everything in the car setup, is being comfortable enough to be able to push more. So now we know there's more time in the car.
Right.
And then that was exactly the same point where we found, you know, when we got consistent, comfortable pace, then the temps started coming up higher and finding all those data points and what we could change in the sensors. And
it's all back to like data and notes, like looking at what the car is doing, knowing where all the settings are. And Nigel, you're very diligent about like change one thing, drive the car, see if it makes a difference, and then change another thing. Don't change more than once.
Yeah.
Because then, like if we would have changed the suspension settings and the diff setting at the same time, did the diff settings make the difference or did the suspension settings? You don't know. It's like with the check engine lights, you change one and then you find out what the next failsafe needs to be.
Sure.
You don't try and just like you can start off with
but
general.
Also, then I think about like what would a street car see? You'd want it to cut out when the guy's seeing like too high oil temps and low oil pressure. Yeah. And the other thing is, I think like the data today, even as a race car, you say to yourself, hey, we see, you know, you're seeing close to 100 pounds of oil pressure when you went out on the first hot lap. But when the car is getting up to like high temperatures, which aren't even high coolant temperatures, like 205 or so, and you're seeing that, and oil pressure at that point is dropping into the 60s. You guys even have a dry sump, so there might be some tuning strategy involved where you're like, hey, let's take that pressure relief valve, and maybe we'll see 120 when the car is cold, but let's by the third hot lap, we want to see 80, 90 psi hot lapping, and let's not lower that limit. Let's actually raise the limit to 70 from
Sure.
60 and turn up the oil pressure.
But it's
And
getting, this is why the
getting the
testing,
data. Yeah.
this is why the testing is so valuable, because now we have a real solid baseline of data with the car.
Sure.
So then we make a single change, or maybe one or two changes that we keep track of, and then from that point, now we come back to the track and figure it out again, or the next event, we data log and we see what differences it makes.
Sure, yeah. And now you have that at your disposal, and I love that. I love that, like, this is it went to your shop and then to a racetrack, and this ECU didn't malfunction. It's the Haltech Nexus,
Yeah.
by the way,
Yep.
folks. I'm impressed. It's
Yeah.
a great thing. Yeah.
I think this is, I see the value in doing it. Like the value of doing this, maybe even a couple of test days like this at track before you go to event. Like, again, just so invaluable.
Yeah.
It's just so clear how well you can utilize this time at the track to figure this stuff out, so that when you go to the event, you have a good event. You're able to focus on what you need to do for the event versus chasing problems or not
Sure.
knowing if what you're seeing is a problem or not. Like this is, again, can't say enough about the value of testing.
Yeah, exactly. And we dropped almost like 10 seconds from the beginning of the day.
Yeah.
And if we did that on a competition weekend, that's almost time wasted, right?
Right.
Because that's focused effort on car setup and stuff. That should be exactly this.
Competing or setting your fastest time. I mean, you
Yeah.
certainly want times to drop through the weekend, but like if you can start off way lower or start off with your focus on what is the most important, like the driving, the tires, like the real nuts and bolts of what gets you to go faster in a lap versus, hey, what are our coolant temps doing? Like, do we have these things right? Like, why are we hitting this fail-safe continuously? Like, is it bad? Is it not? And you're wasting a lot of time at the event where you could be focused on going faster.
The whole day is like filtering all of the possible data we could collect into what is the most meaningful.
Yep.
And so for us, we know now what the most meaningful data points are. The
Yep.
rest is like generally noise until they
Pop up.
Yeah.
Yeah, oh yeah.
Something.
That's what I'm saying. There's so many parameters this thing's logging, different sets of data and hundreds, maybe 200 points of data where you don't really look at it until it tells you like, hey, I'm having a problem.
Right.
Well, you
Until it
experienced
raises
the
its
problem.
hand.
Yep.
And then a good ECU will tell you, hey, this is the oil pressure, this is the coolant pressure. And instantly you have to start sifting through data and saying, at what moment did that happen and what turn was it, or was it the end of the back straight, which is where a lot of stuff happens, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
It can be. So overall, like a really good day, really fun day. Harvey, very glad you could join us. Nigel, very glad you could join us and wheel the
having me.
car around.
Yeah.
We learned a lot, and test, guys. Go to the track and test. Don't just go to drive.
Oh, one last
Also go
thing.
to test.
I want
Yeah.
to say this. So often I don't street tune or anything. I use a dynamometer because it's so repetitive and repeatable, and you can normalize things and get data coming back and forth. And I'll say it's the same thing even on my customers who track here. And this is High Plains Raceway, and so people who track here, they send me data logs, and I can see like, oh, that's that lap. And the same thing's true for someone like you. And people who are good drivers too, you can see consistent data lap to lap, and it becomes like tuning on a dyno where the dyno pull is like 5 minutes or 2 minutes long really.
Yeah.
But it's like, 5 or 10 minutes of data from many laps, and you're like, oh, look, when this guy's driving hard, watch that coolant temp go up and down. And I just want, you guys won't see it, but just so you can see it, this is the coolant temp profile. So that's you going out onto the track. That's your first lap, it's still cold. Second, and there's like a big lull there. I think when you were sitting, when you came in for us to check the pressures, and then you can see it's kind of normal, and then this is the cool down lap, and then it comes up, and this is where we start to have the same kind of oil pressure conditions without the triggers on that last session. So you can step back and just look at that and see the coolant temp through all the laps in one glance and understand what's happening. And if I just put that up and just oil pressure, there would be an inverse relationship,
Well,
so it's so neat.
The track is also a repeatable environment on a day. Now, granted, as we're wrapping up today, it is crazy hot, and this morning it was nice and cool, and it was awesome. But like that's where it's a very long dyno session. That's where you knew that you wanted to come to the track with us so that you could see the car being driven at speed, being put through its paces, full operating temperature, and see what that data set looks like aside from what you saw on the dyno, which was a more controlled environment and over a shorter time. You wanted to see the wider time.
Yeah, and I don't get to see what oil pressure is doing under a 1G condition.
Right, and like the effect of doing more and more hot laps. Like what happens when you go from 2 to 3 to 5 hot laps? It turns out like a lot.
Yeah.
And that's one of the things that we learned today. And now we have
Do your cool down laps, people.
That's right. Do definitely. But we now have
In the
picture
middle,
what that
even.
is.
Like, not at the end of your session. Do like 3 or 4 laps.
And now we have some things to work on for the car. Where okay, well, if we can get even better oil cooling than we have now, so that we can keep an even more consistent oil temperature. Now we have an even clearer picture of what the benefits of that more stable temperature would be.
Sure. Yeah.
So I mean that in and of itself is another learning point.
Oh yeah.
So.
It's amazing how much you've divorced the idea of coolant temp to oil temp, where I see it on most cars that don't have dry sumps. They track together almost all the time, no matter what. They're very close.
Yeah. I mean, we have way better cooling for our coolant than we do for our oil, and we've kind of known that, but now we kind of have seen in spades that that's the case. I'm like, all right, well, what can we do to bring even better cooling to the oil? We'll find
Okay.
out.
Well, I don't mean to keep you folks, so yeah, that's awesome. I agree though. It's
it's one of these things where like this is the proof that it was such a valuable time spent is the fact that we can nerd out about so many things about how the car handles, how the car handled, what can we do to improve that, how did the engine work. We now have a really clear picture of that. What can we do to improve that? So then we think about both of these things between the next session. Make educated improvements in both directions, and then now we have a baseline that we can measure against and know that we're making an improvement.
Yeah, what's interesting to me too, I'll say one final thing, is how little it mattered to me to look at data about timing, air-fuel ratios, and boost. Out here, there's no metric to measure it against other than your lap time. So we sometime could come out here and search for, with you as a consistent driver, on another day you could search for more time through manipulating the standard tuning stuff. But we're just trying to shake down a race car.
We kind of have bigger fish to fry today.
Oh yeah.
Like there's more problems are raising their hand. Like we can't just get to timing and optimizing.
I'll say I trust the dyno anyway. I guarantee we wouldn't find.
And that's why, because we've got the tune sorted out. So now let's put that tune in the real world under real track conditions. Let's see what happens.
Yeah.
And now we've seen what happens. So now we've got a lot of good information to go back to the shop with and work on.
Fun.
So yeah. So it was a fun day. Get out to the track and test if you can. Thanks very much for watching. Thanks for your support as always. Go visit Harvey at the Boostcreep for any tuning needs. Nigel at Unome Racing. Keep an eye on him. He's doing a lot of cool racing this year. And thanks for your support as always. And until next time, stay tuned to Flatirons Tuning.